Welcome to AFFIRM's October Virtual Speaker Series. I'm Jackie Rubino, AFFIRM's president, and we extend our warmest welcome and appreciation to you for joining us today. Today's program, Due Diligence, Securing the Federal Supply Chain, will be showcasing several very distinguished government leaders, moderated by our moderator extraordinaire, Chris Dorobek. I'd like to take a moment to share some insights about AFFIRM, the Association for Federal Information Resources Management. We are a nonprofit, volunteer, educational organization with the goal of improving the management of information through technology. In the spirit of AFFIRM's charter, we have raised and contributed well over $250,000 for high school and college scholarships and grants. We'd like to thank our volunteers for their hard work in putting programs together and continuing to support the IT community, even during these times. A special thank you goes out to today's program leads, Peg Hosky, Bill Pratt, Mark Crisco, and Amelia Codrington. We extend our sincere thanks to our generous speaker series sponsors, SAIC, TrustWave, FedInsider, ServiceNow, Veritas, Excel Technologies, and E3 Sentinel as our sustaining partners shown in the slides. Their logos are included in acknowledgement of our appreciation for their support. I would like to invite Sanjay Sardar from SAIC to say a few words. Sanjay.
Great, thank you, Jackie. SAIC is proud to sponsor crucial discussions on the federal supply chain, such as this one. With the convergence of the physical and digital world, supply chains are getting not only more complex, prone to attack, but are critical to our success. SAIC has a long history of working with these logistics and supply chain issues with our civilian, DoD, and national security customers, and of course, our favorite customer, the DLA, and ensuring readiness, expertise, orchestration, modernization, and security into the supply chain. I look forward to today's discussion, and I'm excited to hear what the panelists have to say. Thank you again, Jackie.
Thank you, Sanjay, and especially to SAIC for your continued support of AFFIRM. AFFIRM will continue to hold an array of virtual programs, so please check AFFIRM's website for more details on upcoming events. Now over to Bill Pratt, one of our program co-chairs, for a few housekeeping items. Bill?
Thank you, Jackie. Folks, if you have a question, simply open the Q&A tab on your webinar toolbar and type in your question. If you see another question you'd like the speakers to answer first, click the thumbs up button to upvote the question. If you're having technical difficulties, use the chat box in your toolbar to chat with the webinar host. We've also included a very brief survey at the end to help capture your feedback on our event to help us continually improve. We appreciate it if you can take that a couple seconds to participate in that survey. The survey will pop up in your internet browser when you close the application. Back to you, Jackie.
Thank you, Bill. Without further ado, I am pleased to announce today's moderator, Chris Dorobek. Chris is a longtime active participant in AFFIRM events. He has been a tremendous supporter and advocate for AFFIRM, and we are so very lucky to have him here today to moderate. So please join me in giving Chris a very warm AFFIRM welcome.
Very nice. Chris. Thank you, Jackie. One of the pieces that Bill didn't mention is this will also be available on demand. So if there's some piece that one of the speakers says you particularly want to hear again, we're going to send it out to you with a link, and it will go straight to the email that you use to register, however you say that in real English. And also our other AFFIRM programs. We'll highlight a couple of those. Like Jackie participated in our AFFIRM book club, where we talked about an awesome book about how to lead in moments of crisis. So Jackie was one of the participants who and the author of the book. She was awesome. So we'll send that out to you too, so you can have that. As Jackie mentioned, I am Chris Dorobek. This is we've been doing this virtual thing for a while. I'm not asking anybody if they're wearing pants. How about that? Let me quickly introduce myself. My name is Chris Dorobek. I was the editor of Federal Computer Week. Then I was the afternoon guy at Federal News Radio. Apparently, I can't keep a job. I now do a blog and podcast with GovLoop called GovLoop's DorobekINSIDER, where we focus on 6 words, helping government do its job better. I'm also writing a book about how to do this, how to moderate, because we've all sat through those sessions where it feels like you're just watching your life pass before your eyes. Well, we're not going to do that today. The book is called Moderators Matter, because I believe moderators can make a difference. You can follow me, my social media, all that kind of stuff on my blog, cdorobek.com will take you right there. And look at the remarkable people that we have joining us today. Let me introduce our esteemed panel. Great folks. Colonel Ronald Hughes, he goes by RJ. So he is the U.S. Army Supply Chain Security. He's at the Defense Logistics Agency. Mr. Sly Ahn, he is the Supply Chain Security Lead for the Portfolio Program Support Division at the Defense Logistics Agency. He's the one, you can't see his face, but we wanted him here, and he's at a place, I'm going to ask him later, where is this place that they don't have internet? But there apparently are still places. Shon Lyublanovits, did I do it right, Shon? Is she on? And she'll correct me later. She's a senior advisor for the Cybersecurity Office of Information Technology category at the General Services Administration's Federal Acquisition Service. And Dr. Thresa Lang, she is Acting Chief Information Security Officer at the Department of Homeland Security. That is part of the Chief Information Officer's Office. There you go. With all that, you got your directions about questions. Please don't be shy, people. I was talking to our panelists earlier and telling them how thoughtful and smart AFFIRM audiences are. So don't make a liar out of me. Show them your stuff. It'll be a great conversation. I was also teasing the panelists earlier that the term supply chain, well, let's be a little bit honest. It can be. We all like supply chain. We all said it's a little bit boring. Seems a little dry, right? Dry, and I've covered financial management systems, so I know what boring is. But given the last 10 months, we've all come to learn how important supply chains are. I mean, we've actually seen people in races down the aisles to get Clorox wipes, for goodness sakes. We know how much supply chains matter. And in fact, in COVID, we didn't even know what COVID was, but we knew there was a problem. Apple announced that it was having trouble making iPhones because of some virus, the name of which we didn't even remember. Remember that back in January? Oh, January, when we could actually shake hands. I know, what a concept. We're now all keenly aware of how important supply chains are and how important security is. So I'm going to start off by asking, I told the folks, we're going to start off by getting supply chain feels like one of those Rorschach words. Everybody defines it in a little bit different way. So Sly, I'm going to go to you first and just define what supply chain is and why it matters, and particularly why it matters to DoD. Are you all out there? I'm unmuting everybody. So unmute all. There you go. You're all unmuted. Sly, you start.
Okay, Chris, can you hear me?
Yeah, great.
Okay, well, that was a great introduction, Chris, and you're absolutely right. Supply chain is defined differently, I would say, across the DoD and even across commercial industry. But from a DLA perspective, when we talk supply chain, we're looking all the way back to raw materials and the manufacturing process to create an end item, to include any sort of subcomponent or component manufacturing that goes into that end item. We also talk about the inbound logistics of that end item into DLA, and then potential storage by DLA or one of our third-party logistics providers, and then finally kind of the outbound logistics or delivery to our end customer, either the warfighter or one of our holo government partners. One unique aspect of DLA is our disposition services addition to the normal supply chain. Some folks call it reverse logistics, but this is when one of our customers turns in something either for disposal or for reutilization, effectively making whatever is turned in into a supply chain of itself. So that's what we mean when we talk, at least in terms of DLA, the end-to-end supply chain. I wanted to highlight as well, though, it's not just the nodes, if you will, that I just spoke to. It's all of the transportation lanes in between those nodes, all the infrastructure, roads, airways, shipping lanes, and then it's also the information flow between all of those different stakeholders involved with that kind of physical transport of material from the beginning to the end of that supply chain. So lots of moving pieces here.
Yeah.
Some organizations focus on certain areas more than others, but from a DLA perspective, we're trying to focus really on a little bit of everything, but mostly anything that could affect that kind of physical flow of material through the supply chain.
Colonel, I'm going to allow you to correct anything that Sly messed up on, if you want, but also expand it a little bit, because we've been doing supply chain management for a long time. Why is this hard? Why is this difficult?
Thanks, Chris. Well, I really can't correct Sly because he's definitely the expert. He's been doing this in DLA for much longer than I have, but it's complex because now when you look at how our supply chains operate, it's a global environment. And so you have, it might be an American company, but the manufacturing or the raw materials are scattered throughout the world. So it becomes a much more complex problem set to manage. At DLA alone, we manage over 3 million items for DoD and whole government. So that, of course, is large. And the one question we get a lot of times is, are you guys trying to boil the ocean? And we're not. So you have to stay focused on what are the key priority either end items, components that support the warfighter. But then again, and that's one of our big efforts at DLA is working to understand threat intelligence, to understand tier 1 through tier N vendors. And so those are the things that we're focused on at DLA to help build that assessment and understanding of the supply chain, because each component and end item has its own chain, has its own interdependencies. And so I would say it's just that global environment that we have with production lines all across, and then trying to understand all the interdependencies. That's what makes it complex.
And either RJ or Sly, why does this matter? I think sometimes we start talking about, because there are so many pieces of supply chain management, we sometimes forget why the end goal is getting stuff that for DLA, getting stuff to the warfighters that they need to be able to carry out their mission, which is defend this country, right? That's the end goal here, right? Did I put that succinct? I probably made it too succinct, but.
No, you're absolutely right, Chris.
Go ahead.
So DLA's mission is really warfighter readiness and lethality, which is kind of nested or aligned with kind of the national defense strategy.
Right.
But I also wanted to mention that we have a lot of other whole of government partners, so non-DoD customers to support other efforts. Most notable recently is the COVID effort. So, pandemic response, providing PPE, providing medical items, things of that nature. The Forest Service, we have fires going on in California and other places, and any number of other kind of humanitarian assistance disaster relief efforts, which include hurricane response as well. So, yes, our primary mission is for the warfighter, but we do have other missions to supply these items, and that's why it's so important. And
I mean, I joked about Clorox wipes, which are important in it, but you guys are talking about really important things. You guys are talking about people who, if they don't get what they need, it makes a big difference in how they're able to do their jobs, right? I mean, I think sometimes we gloss over why this matters, but this is critically important to carrying out the mission, right?
Absolutely right.
Yeah. Let me bring in Shon Lyublanovits. She is Senior Advisor for the Cybersecurity Office of Information Technology category at GSA's Federal Acquisitions Service. Shon, one of the things that we all talked about was the difference between cybersecurity, which I think, goodness knows we've talked about a lot, and supply chain security. It's not just a linguist. This isn't just we added a couple names, is it?
No, not at all. But, I think the key thing is what's the commonality first. So I'll say that first. And it really is about managing risk at the end of the day. So when I look at cybersecurity specifically, I'm looking at, protecting our systems, our networks, our programs, and our people, and just the different controls and governance structures that we have in place to facilitate that digitally, right? But when I look at supply chain, as you've heard both RJ and Sly mention, it's that linear line, right? So, and I want to start from that agreement. And I think specifically in GSA, what we want to help people with is the acquisition side of the house. Before you even think about buying, let's think about what that agreement needs to be between a vendor and whether you're a federal partner or just, a company here within the United States. What is it that I need to ask for? Set and manage expectations up front for supply chain is so important. So having the right parameters to follow from thought, concept, and strategy down to getting a product in your hands. What does that line look like? And I think that's the part we're trying to sort of peel away the onion layer, as you call it right now, to make sure that we're looking at each particular step.
Dr. Thresa Lang, hold on, let me reintroduce you because it's been a while since I did that. She is Acting Chief Information Security Officer at the Department of Homeland Security. Dr. Lang, talk a little bit about, well, there were a whole bunch of people have talked about a whole bunch of stuff, and here's the easiest question you've ever had. Talk about some of it. Choose a piece that you think is particularly important and go.
Supply chain is important from end to end. I'll make that easy. It's making sure that we have integrity of the components. And one of my worries is always integrated chips. It's important to make sure that we understand that we don't necessarily have control over where that comes from. And we want to make sure there's no undocumented functionality. And also, I want to hit on the industrial base, because this is very important to them for their own economic well-being as well as our national security. And it's up to the industrial base to make sure that they are securing their own supply chains, and they're using a reasonable cyber baseline, and they're taking a good risk-based approach.
So how do you do this? Because as I've been reading about supply chain, and this is, I've done a couple of these sessions on, this feels like one of these things where the more you read about it and the more you know, the more concerning, more concerning it can get. And as you look at the industrial base, how does even an agency the size of DHS check and make sure that chips are all secure and that the industrial base has all their supply chains? It feels like a problem that just gets larger and larger. And frankly, if I had any one of your jobs, I wouldn't sleep at night. How do you sleep at night?
This is one of the reasons that GSA and DLA are so important, because it's critical to make sure that we understand all of the players along the way in the supply chain. It's very important to know who has handled what, to know if we have a place in the supply chain where there is less control, and that may be a place where counterfeits could be added into the supply chain, or where we have gray market components. So having these agencies that really track the supply chain is critical. And we're starting to work closely with vendors to make sure that they understand what they can do for their supply chains, that they understand the controls that are required, and that they are using components and end equipment that they're very comfortable with. So a lot of this is procurement, as has already been discussed. Right. A lot of education. And I think a lot of it comes down to just getting the right information and making sure everyone understands it.
Colonel Hughes, similar question, but how do you, there are so many pieces, and DOD, a huge buyer, right? But as we've learned over the recent years, particularly around technology, it's not the biggest buyer anymore, consumers are. And so how do you ensure that the supply chain is where the industrial base is doing what it needs to do to make sure you can do what you need to do?
Well, I think as I mentioned previously, it's such a vast problem set, and one of the key things that we've done at DLA is publish a supply chain security strategy, which kind of serves as a framework, developed a risk register of a whole litany of potential risks. Then we've actually prioritized what we believe are the most critical risks to DLA in our ability to conduct our mission. So that way we can put our effort, time, resources into what we feel are the most potential risks. I think that's one of the first steps that when you talk supply chain, you really have to make sure you're focused at the right level. Otherwise, it becomes an overwhelming issue, and then you're not attacking it from a coordinated standpoint. And so that's one of the big things that we've been, and we're still developing our supply chain security in terms of operationalizing it. That's something that Sly and I have been working hard on. It's in conjunction with academia. We have reached out to commercial sector to learn best practices, our partner organizations, interagency. So that's where, you know, we're still kind of moving forward in our program, and it's going to take time. I think that's one of the biggest things. It's going to be a coordinated effort across DoD in order to do it right.
Sly, I want to get you on that, but also back to the question about the difference between, let me just quickly mention for everyone that I put a link to the supply chain security strategy in the chat. So if you want to find that, I also have it on my Twitter feed at @CDorobek, so you can find that and have it and make it easily accessible. Sly, that question, but also a little bit about cybersecurity and supply chain security. What's the difference here?
Yeah, so Chris, the big difference there is, you know, cybersecurity, as was previously mentioned, is really focused on, you know, the IT information side of things, the digital aspects of the supply chain, which is a relatively new thing to the supply chain industry. So that's the big difference. Supply chain security, I would say, encompasses cybersecurity in relation to the supply chain, but it isn't the only piece. And just to add on to some of the other discussions, I really think that the focus right now, from what we've seen and from our discussions across the DoD and commercial industry, is really two things. Number one, supply chain illumination. So what is supply chain illumination? Very quickly, all that is identifying all of the key infrastructure, all the key assets from tier 1 to tier N, all the way back to raw materials. So you can actually map out where your stuff comes from, whatever stuff that might be. It could be an integrated circuit, it could be an engine part, et cetera, et cetera. So that's the first piece. Where do we get that kind of information? It doesn't currently exist right now in a lot of cases, and a lot of the companies that the government contracts with don't even have that kind of detailed information either. So we need to leverage things like artificial intelligence, machine learning, open source intelligence to be able to get that kind of information. The second piece I wanted to quickly mention is supply chain threat intelligence. As RJ mentioned, there is so many things that can disrupt the supply chain, and especially with the added complexity of the digital side of the supply chain, the cybersecurity side, you know, it's hard to even quantify, okay, what can affect the supply chain, let alone actually determine what will or potentially affect the supply chain. So the supply chain intelligence piece is very complex as well, because yes, we want to rely on commercial industry and their open source intelligence. There's companies out there that can illuminate the supply chain, but I think a piece that a lot of folks forget is intelligence is not just on the kind of unclassified open source side. We also have the secret, top secret, the intelligence community side of intelligence that needs to be brought into this as well, because there is that, you know, foreign influence and bad actor side of supply chain security that is just as important, if not more important, than some of these others. So making sure that we do like a full spectrum supply chain threat intelligence gathering, as well as have a system that can ingest all of that. You know, an unclassed system, for example, can't ingest classified data. So we may have to go the route of, you know, a higher classification system to do supply chain security.
Shon, talk a little bit, because I think half the people that are with us are saying, you're part of the acquisition team and at GSA, like half the people are going, hold on, what's acquisition has anything to do with supply chain? They're really two different things. Half the people are saying, well, supply chain is basically acquisition. Connect the two pieces for us.
Yeah, absolutely. And I appreciate the question. For us, we kind of decided to live in 3 buckets. And, I would say for anyone listening today, if you're having trouble digesting this, look at 3 concepts. So acquisition and policy compliance. So again, that's really is how you determine what your contract language is going to look like. So I can't demand that a vendor comply with supply chain risk management if there's no language to tell them how to do that. I think that's hugely important that we train our acquisition professionals to understand what to look for. Now, that doesn't mean that you're going to go out and become this whole cyber expert, but there has to be sort of that basic level understanding that we are going to have for cybersecurity and supply chain risk management as we move forward. As RJ and both Sly were speaking about, when you're gathering information, even on the unclassed side, regarding bad actors and looking at situational awareness for new things coming down the pipe, they have to understand how to interpret that. Our CEOs, they're going to be the ones that have to make sure that they communicate and also enforce with the vendor community. And I also think as vendors are trying to get on different schedules and sell their products, they need to understand coming in the door what the expectation is. So, and I also want to touch on that supplier relationship management. And I think it was briefly touched on the risk profiles. Making sure that you understand the right vendors to contract with for the type of the work that you're doing makes a difference. So as an agency, what kind of mission do I have? Am I sort of looking at maybe a risk profile 1, which could be low versus a risk profile high? Well, maybe I can't go to vendor B for what I need. So I think understanding just sort of general vendor risk profiles and that information sharing piece is going to be hugely important. And to put a bow on it, it's the cyber scrim. So how do we pull those parts together and wrap a bow around it with cyber supply chain risk management?
Shon, I'm going to stick with you, and then Dr. Lang, I'm going to come over to you to ask you about, we've all heard a lot about the risk management framework. Does that apply in a supply chain space?
Absolutely. It's going to be hugely important to that. Again, understanding what are my assets, right? What are the crown jewels? How do I classify those? And making sure that I am contracting with vendors that meet those risk profiles. But if I don't understand how to identify and mitigate and respond and recover and understand what those things are, then I'm not going to be effective when I go to try to pull those pieces together to assess a vendor and continually surveil them. So that's another piece we haven't talked about. So just because a vendor is good today, are they going to be good tomorrow? And so there has to be a way to make sure that we're continuously monitoring their environments and their work efforts to make sure that they stay top notch for our work efforts.
Dr. Lang, anything you want to add to connecting that?
I think the RMF is critical. It not only puts the controls in place that we can measure our integrity against, it does have very specific controls for supply chain now. And although it doesn't have a lot yet, this is something I'm sure NIST is looking into. And while that's happening, we're also looking at DoD's cyber maturity model. And we think that this is a good way forward and that it would be something that would be very useful to vendors and to other agencies and partners to understand how to do the cyber maturity model and how that would apply across the supply chain. DHS is very interested in these kind of innovations because it's important for us to be promoting our economy and our security. We sit in a place where we have law enforcement and intelligence and national security and humanitarian responses. We have all of those things that come under our purview. And supply chain has become so important that we are one of the principals on the Federal Acquisition Supply Chain Council. So it's one of the things that we want to make sure that everyone is paying attention to. We want to make sure that we have the right guidance and governance in place. For example, through our component CISA, we issue BODs, the Binding Operational Directive, and then we follow up on those. We aggregate information from across the government, from the private sector. We come up with mitigations, and then we work to help the government take care of vulnerabilities. And this is especially true in the supply chain area.
Yeah. Colonel, talk a little bit about the pink elephant that sits in all of our rooms right now, which is this big COVID thing. How does that change? Part of it is risk management, right? None of us really saw COVID coming. None of us would anticipate that we'd be stuck in our rooms for 10 months, for goodness sakes. Who would have imagined? How do you apply that in a risk management format? But also, how has it changed how you do your job and how you ensure that you're accomplishing your mission? Your mission doesn't change. You still have to get it done.
So I was, with COVID, it reinforced with DLA the ability or the idea of simultaneity, because even with COVID hitting and DLA, just like a lot of other agencies, stood up task forces and, you detailed personnel to kind of focus on this mission. We still have soldiers, sailors, airmen, and Marines deployed around the world, and we had to still maintain our supply chains to support them. So even though you saw a decrease, if you will, in operational tempo in some theaters based on COVID, we were still actively engaged in higher operational tempo in others. So it just kind of reinforced the importance. From Sly and I's perspective, I would say it, in all honesty, has helped us gain even more traction with our efforts in terms of operationalizing it. Everyone within DLA, we have 9 kind of distinct supply chains, and all of them do risk management. Everyone has been, especially in the military, risk management is something that you grow up with. I've been in 21 years and, you learn early on. So it's not that it wasn't being done. It's always been done. What really our effort has been to create a standard, something that is a process that's repeatable, it's comprehensive, and it's something we can do continuously to really do our best efforts to mitigate risk. You'll never reduce all risk. COVID showed weak points in our supply chain, and it kind of forced us to look at other avenues. We leveraged, OUSD, some of their, because how we operate, of course, comes from policy. So we have our constraints and what we can impact, but we saw, trying to bring back, you see the federal government's trying to bring back manufacturing of certain things into the United States to try to mitigate those risks. So we have to operate in those confines.
You mentioned policies, and I know there are lots of government organizations that in order to still accomplish their mission, a lot of these policies had to be, okay, we're not doing that right now. They had to make choices, right? Are there things that, and now my sense is after doing this for 10 months, a lot of people are going through this process of saying, okay, which of those were not really necessary? We didn't need the policy for that. Which maybe we blew by it and we really need to come back and focus on? Are there changes now 10 months into this COVID world that you're looking at that will change how you do business from here on out?
I don't know if I can necessarily speak to, changes since I'm at DLA, right. and really a lot of our policy that we're falling in under is from OUSD, ANS, right. Miss Lord and those, the Honorable Gillis. That's really where we get a lot of our policy directives. I would say from a DLA standpoint, right. where we can impact it, it is just a more robust, standardized process, as Sly mentioned, doing the interdependency, mapping out the supply chains from tier 1 to tier N, so that we can at least then provide the director of DLA and the senior leaders, because something bad's going to happen. What we're trying to do is get to the point where they can react faster, because right now we don't have everything in place where we want, but we're getting there. And so the goal is that we can be at least proactive where we can, at least especially on the acquisition side. But once you get out of the acquisition, you start contracts are let and you're managing then the supply chain, that's where you need a little more real time, a little more the ability to adjust on the fly.
Yeah, it made us a lot more agile, didn't it? Who knew we were this agile, for goodness sakes? Theresa, Shon, Sly, anything on COVID-19 that you guys want to chime in on?
Yeah, hey, this is Sly.
Yeah,
just a little bit of addition to what RJ was saying. I mean, the COVID crisis, which we're still going through, I think is just a really big eye opener in terms of not just the PPE pharmaceutical side of things, but just all of our different options for procurement. And I think it's put a lot more focus on getting that dynamic threat intelligence. For the example of the pandemic, I'm not saying that had we known certain things earlier that we could have prevented how things turned out. But what I am saying is that, speaking to what RJ said, maybe we could have reacted faster, or if we had the modeling and predictive analysis capabilities that we're looking to go towards in terms of intelligence gathering and analysis, that could have produced some areas of potential risk that we could have addressed maybe a little bit earlier. This isn't the first pandemic we've had. We've had other ones, and we've had lessons learned from them. So maybe some of that technology, that new technology that I mentioned in the supply chain intelligence gathering realm, could help us out in the future for pandemics and other unplanned crises.
Dr. Lang?
I think it's notable that during this pandemic, we haven't failed in other areas because we've had to change our processes. For example, FEMA still takes care of humanitarian efforts. They still respond when there are hurricanes, and they do all this in the COVID environment. And they make sure that supplies are available for people. And it's something that can't stop because of the COVID environment. We have critical missions across all of our components, and to date we have continued with every one of those missions. So whereas it's important to change the process so that we can adapt, we went to telework almost overnight at headquarters, and it was successful. But there are areas where it's really important that we learn the new processes. For example, onboarding new people, making sure that we can respond to any sort of crisis. Those are critical. Every one of those missions are critical, and we need to get the processes in place to continue those missions regardless of what our environment is.
Yeah. Shon, did you want to add anything in?
Yeah, just really quickly, I'll say the importance of cyber acquisition. I think traditionally, the acquisition folks sat on one side of the table and the cyber sat on the other side. We had to come together. It really was about trying to make sure that we both were understanding each other's roles and how we could do those successfully. In GSA, we had to be able to do things quickly and on the fly when COVID happened. But it was about understanding that cyber need and making sure that we had the right language updated in the contracts to execute.
Yeah. Let me get to a couple. There's a bunch of questions here, so let me get to a couple of them. Link is the founder of an organization called Rocket. Looks like he does work for DLA, so maybe you guys know him. He says, our lab in Richmond is demonstrating the future of logistics. For example, DLA 2025, which pushes DoD supply chain and sustainment to the state of the art. Do you buy prototyping of individual innovations or future systems? For example, AI insights, prediction, decision optimization. There you go. I hope I asked that right, Link. So Sly, Colonel, you guys want to?
Yeah, so we have a couple of things underway at DLA, really to get at those two pieces that I talked about, the illumination piece as well as the threat intelligence piece. So, and then, looking further ahead, the scale of the issues is one of the big elephants in the room, if you will, for supply chain security. For DLA, again, over 3 million NSNs. We don't want to boil the ocean. How do we narrow that down? But, each customer is going to have their own set of critical needs, and not necessarily each customer, but each mission will have its own set of critical needs, and that's constantly changing depending on what's going on in the world. And then on the acquisition side, the industrial-based side, that's constantly changing as well. You're going for new contracts, or you're doing a new bid for a contract that's about to run out. Things happen with vendors. So we have to be very agile in that regard. But I think the key to all of this really is, yes, we have to be agile, but we also have to balance the agility and the speed of information, that kind of dynamic threat intelligence side of things, with quality. Are we vetting that information? Is the information that we're getting valid? Is it authoritative? Can we make multi-million-dollar decisions that can make or break folks with intelligence that is not necessarily up to par in terms of the intelligence community standards? There's also the legal aspect of using this kind of information for like a contract award, or even after contract award. So there's a lot of complexity here, and I appreciate the question and the comment. I think it gets at where we need to go in terms of this advanced technology to help us do all of this better in this complex environment.
Anybody else want to comment, Colonel, anything? Not, I have another question from Dr. Kirshen. Am I saying it right? You'll let me know. How are you adapting security strategies to new and advanced technologies such as RFID? RFID it's been around a little bit, but still, Colonel, why don't you start with that, and then I'm going to go to Theresa.
Advanced technology. I know we one of the things DLA is doing is DNA imprinting on circuits. So that's one, leveraging new technology to prevent counterfeiting. Kind of to that other question, too, the advances in technology, AI, machine learning, from an ability to understand threats. I think another strong lesson learned that we leveraged in COVID was additive manufacturing. Being able to very quickly, one example that DLA worked was face shields for frontline workers. Very quickly leveraging additive manufacturing, being able to deliver 10,000 to the Javits Center in New York. So I think the advances in manufacturing technology is just as important, because that enabled us, they were able to do it in the United States very quickly, and to kind of, based on second and third order impacts from maybe overseas shipments, still able to meet the mission. But I just leveraged that DLA though is using like DNA marking and things of that nature. Over.
Dr. Lang, RFID is one example, but there are all sorts of examples where new technologies come in, and sometimes security is not at the forefront of what they're trying to push the boundaries, and security sometimes gets pushed to the back. How do you deal with that, particularly in a supply chain framework?
In the supply chain, the security is paramount, security and integrity both. And for RFID, it has come a long way in the last few years. And it's more than just location tracking. In some cases, it can do environmental assessment to basically tell you humidity inside a case, or whatever that could be a problem with the components or whatever's being shipped. So RFID has become standard in many areas of the supply chain. The plant-based DNA, I think, is a really exciting way forward for supply chain, being able to mark specific things with specific strains is a real step forward. So I see a lot more of this type of emerging technology being used in supply chain. As for the machine learning, it is absolutely critical. Supply chain is enormous, and it does cover every aspect of what we do in some way. So having all of that data to ingest and making sense of it is critical. So I think the machine learning piece, the neural networks pieces, those are going to become increasingly important if we continue advancing in the supply chain area.
Shon, do you want to get in on this at all about new technologies and how? I mean, I know it's hard for acquisition too, right? We get into all of a sudden people are all doing cloud, and how do we buy cloud? And we've learned how to do it much better over the years. So it can take a little time, but how do you do this in an effective way?
Yeah, I have to go back and echo what everyone's been saying. It's that, you know, AI that's going to help us parse all that data. We're getting so much information from all over the place, but how do we make sense of it? And how do we develop policy so that we can at least try to say, here are the standards by which you need to sort of consider when you're looking at a new acquisition. We're trying to do that manually in some aspects now, and that's hard, especially in the vendor risk assessment arena.
Dr. Lang, a question for you from Dave. And Dave, I'm not even trying your last name. Sorry about that. He says, Dr. Lang mentioned DHS has started working with vendors on understanding controls as well as looking at the DoD cyber maturity model. Is there a time frame for completing those efforts, and what's DHS's end goal for supply chain?
I do not have a timeline for that. We've been working internally, especially with our procurement and acquisition professionals, and we have dealt with several of the vendors to make sure that there are supply chain, that every aspect of the supply chain is being looked at. Right now, we have several pilots that are being run with specific vendors and with specific technologies and in goals. They are very specific projects. I don't see this going away. This is going to continue to grow, and the outreach will continue.
Sly, we only have a couple more minutes left, but I wanted to talk, one of the other conversations I was doing on supply chain, they were talking about the importance of data. And I mean, data is now, it's hard to go through a conversation without people talking about data these days, for goodness sakes. Data is everywhere. But I think people don't always connect. Supply chain is also, has all sorts of data connected to it, and securing all that data also becomes important.
Yeah, absolutely, Chris. So there's a few aspects of data that have been discussed during this discussion, and if I can just encapsulate it very quickly, I would say there's the asset piece of it, the defense industrial base asset data, the transportation asset data, DLA's data, the warfighters data, you know, the information technology data. That's all asset data, and then the other side of data is really the threat intelligence side of things, and that goes back to what I was saying earlier about not only is it the scale and the volume of the data, but it is the different mediums of the data. So multiple classifications, and you're not going to really get that whole picture that you need of everything that can potentially disrupt the supply chain, or even has already disrupted the supply chain, and you just don't have a means of detecting it. Where do we house all that information? And does each government organization go off and do that on their own, or should we have a single source, an authoritative source that consolidates all of that information that everyone can draw from? So when we talk data, that to me is the real heart of the matter. Is we need high quality data. We need it very quickly. We need to be dynamic, so updated very often, and then we need everybody using that same data so that we know that it's vetted. We know there's a common picture out there, and we know that we're hitting the right things.
Dr. Lang, do you want to talk about the data piece? Because I know data is a big part of your job, is making sure all DHS data is secure and safe.
At the end of the day, a lot of it comes down to data. It comes down to how we manage it, how we understand it. We can have really good supply chain processes. We can have really good supply chain integrity. And if we don't know how to manage the data associated with that, we're not going to be able to improve from where we are. So data is critical to everything we do. And having a way to put it and to take tons of data and turn it into information that is actionable is going to be critical. It's critical now, but it's becoming more critical.
Colonel, Shon, you guys want to talk about this piece, or if not, I'm going to go. Nope, you're good, Shon? Good.
Yeah, the only thing I'll say really quickly is it's about improving decision making, right? I think at the end of the day, we all want to help improve decision making.
Yeah. And it's, you know, we always talk about risk assessment. I always think about risk assessment. Human beings aren't good at this, and I've seen too many people. The most dangerous things we do in our lives, well, now add a list, but is get into a big piece of metal and drive it 70 miles an hour. And now I see people who pick up their devices and say, oh, that's not dangerous enough. Let me look at something else, take my eyes off the road. So it's like, oh, we're not always good at risk assessment, right? Let me go around and kind of leave you with, have you leave folks. We have a lot of industry folks. Part one of the question is, how can industry help you do your jobs better? What can they do for you? The second part is, if you can leave everyone with a thought that they can really take away with them, what do you hope they really take away? Colonel, I'll start with you.
Thanks, Chris. So I would say how industry can help is, and I think they're doing it, is, you know, they recognize if they don't have supply chain security for their industry, you know, that's going to impact their bottom line. Right. And, you know, DoD going forward, DLA, that's, and the other panelists have talked about it, you know, we're putting that language, cybersecurity, in contracts. So companies that are bidding need to demonstrate that they have proper cybersecurity controls in place, the maturity model that's coming on board. I just sat on a acquisition panel, and, you know, that was one of the focus areas that I was looking at. Yeah. And so that is how industry can help, is having that same level of concern and the impacts going forward, which I think, you know, they're already doing. And it's being open when we're having those discussions, because it is a collaborative effort. You know, vulnerabilities in the defense industrial base directly impact DLA's ability to do its job. For takeaways, you know, Sly's mentioned it, I've mentioned it. You know, from a DLA perspective, our biggest thing that we're really working to get after is illumination of the supply chain, really understanding from end to end, from raw materials through complete production, you know, who and what are is touching it.
Transparency into it, right?
Yes, and then the threat intelligence. You know, those are two of the biggest things, because, you know, with our methodology, we look at 3 variables to come up with a risk prioritization, and that it's the threat detectability, threat likelihood, and then the criticality of whatever it is we're managing. So right there, 2 out of 3 variables come down to threat.
There you go. Shon, what do you hope give people a thought to take away with them?
Yeah, you know, I think you took the word. It's transparency, most certainly, from the vendor community. Also, collaborate with us. You know, if there are issues that we're not looking at that we need to look at, have a seat at the table and let's discuss it. I think for federal customers and agencies, supply chain risk management's not going away. You've got to make it a focus within your organization and at least get some sort of minimal program in place to start addressing it.
Dr. Lang?
Resilience. Every organization needs to make sure that their supply chain is prepared for threats and hazards, and that they have the processes in place to recover and to continue their work after a disruption.
Can you see one of the stickies on my computer that says resilience? I would mind. That's like, oh my goodness.
Oh yeah, I saw
that. Sly, wrap this up in a big bow and bring it home for us.
Okay, it's always good to close things out, I guess. I think everyone said the big things that need to be said. I would just say anything that the commercial industry, that our industry partners can do to make our jobs easier in terms of supply chain security, maybe mapping out their supply chains and providing some of the information, then also the emerging technology piece of things, because we need to stay ahead of the game when it comes to disruptions to the supply chain, and we can only do that, as we've discussed, with these new technologies like AI, DNA marking, machine learning. You know, of course, commercial industry is at the cutting edge, more so than government. So we're looking to them to kind of help us out in that regard and make us faster and better and get better data.
Colonel Hughes, Sly Ahn and Colonel Hughes with the Defense Logistics Agency, Shon Lyublanovits, did I do it right, with GSA, and Thresa Lang, Dr. Thresa Lang, Acting Chief Information Security Officer with Homeland Security. Thank you guys so much. Really, really appreciate your insights. You know, Jackie, I would usually close these things out and say it's the best of times and it's the worst of times. And thank goodness these people are out there doing the best work in the worst of times. Of course, 2020 has redefined what we consider the worst of times. We now know we have our baseline. But thank you guys all for both joining us and for doing what you do and helping us understand it. Thank you so much. With that, Jackie, it's all yours.
Well, thank you so much, Chris. Your moderating is always exceptional, and we really appreciate you. And thank you to this esteemed panel, Colonel Hughes, Sly, Shon, and Dr. Lang. What a timely discussion, and really some very valuable and great insights. So we appreciate you taking this time during your busy schedules to come have this conversation with all of us. AFFIRM really applauds your contributions and leadership through these unprecedented times, because now more than ever, we really need to pay attention to the supply chain and those vulnerabilities. So thanks to everyone for joining us today. We encourage you all to take the time to complete the survey that was mentioned earlier. We hope you had a wonderful time and really enjoyed our program. And visit with us next month on November 18th. Our program event is on leveraging technology for disaster recovery in government. And on December 16th, we have our event of Hot Trends for 2021. We also will have our yearly Marine Corps Toys for Tots drive, and we'll be looking for you to help us make the day for less fortunate children. My goodness, I really need another coffee tongue twister. Thanks all very much. Have a great afternoon. Take care.